At UMC, access to your healthcare is only a call away. Dial 74-NURSE for free, instant medical advice from experienced and trusted UMC nurses, 24 hours a day. Learn more at umchealthsystem.com.
And welcome in, everyone, to RedRaiders.com. I'm Zach Long, that's Don Williams, and this, of course, is Don versus Twitter. As Don Williams deals with a round of Twitter questions for the first time this season after a Texas Tech loss. Of course, that coming last week to Oklahoma, Don, but no time to mope for the Red Raiders. They got Oklahoma State this weekend.
That's right. Big one coming up on Saturday at Jones Stadium. A rare night home game.
My goodness, finally.
Night home game. It's the last Saturday night game at home for the Red Raiders this season, and actually I guess the first Saturday night game at home in conference play since, what, 11?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Well, let's investigate the mood of your Twitter followers, Don, at this state in the Tech season. Let's start first with Lynn Lauterbach. At AJ Don Williams, did Tuberville ever pay the Tech monies owed, as in what he owed after he left early from his contract when he went to Cincinnati?
That's right. Yes, he did, Lynn. Tommy Tuberville had a buyout of a little more than $900,000 that he had to pay to Tech to fulfill the contract obligation. He actually had one full year to do that until December, but I'm told that Texas Tech has already received that money. So yes.
How kind of him.
How kind of him.
Don, onward here. Hootens, Arkansas football. My God, your reach is everlasting, isn't it? You get all over the country with your Twitter followers.
That's
here.
My friend Chris Hooten, a Texas Tech graduate who I've known since college, more than a quarter century. We appreciate him sending us a couple of questions.
When you say quarter century, you make it sound like you're really old and been here a long time.
Mm-hmm. We actually worked together on the University Daily, what they now call the Daily Toreador, back in the 1980s.
My goodness. His first question for you, Don. If Simmons and Start, of course referring to Delvon Simmons and Michael Starks, were in the defensive tackle rotation, would Texas Tech still be unbeaten?
You know, Chris, after seeing Oklahoma run for nearly 300 yards and 200 of that in the second half, it's tempting to say yes. But after going back and forth on this one, I think no. And you have to take into account what you have with these two guys. I can't see how anybody with a football background ever looked at Delvon Simmons and saw him as a difference maker. He's big, but he's not explosive. He takes up space, but he's not disruptive, let alone dominant. And for a guy, I don't care that the guy was a five-star recruit or whatever, I think he's a future seventh-round draft choice, if that, depending on what he does these next couple of years at Southern Cal. Now with Michael Starks, I got to tell you, 25 years of covering Texas Tech football, I have never seen a guy walk in the door as an 18-year-old freshman physically with a more impressive physique. With that said, though, during his time here, he got a reputation for being soft and not really tough and wanting it that much. Cliff Kingsbury actually wanted to play him on the offensive line to help the depth there, and he balked at it. And then he just stopped showing up and stopped coming in to do physical conditioning and some stuff that he owed the coaches for, what should I say?
Indiscretions.
Indiscretions. And he wound up just quitting on them. And unless that kid get hit, the kid has all the physical tools in the world, but unless he gets tougher, I don't see it him ever really panning out. Hope he does. But that's why he's not here anymore. And so I'm not sure that even those guys.
Both those guys had a lot of work to do to get into that rotation. They weren't a foregone conclusion to be a part of Tech's defense. They had a lot of work to do if you talk to any of those coaches on this staff.
Well, I might take a little bit of exception there. Delvon did start 13 games last year. I think he's an okay college player. I just don't think he's ever going to be the great player that people expected when he was a signee.
Continuing on this subject matter, Don, how far does Texas Tech defensive line or defense in general fall off next year?
Well, I tell you what, I think Matt Wallerstedt has his work cut out for him. And I can see Tech giving up a touchdown a game more next year. Look at all the people that you're going to lose. In the defensive line, Kerry Hyder, Dartwan Bush, Donnell Wesley. At linebacker, Terrence Bullitt, Will Smith. In the secondary, Bruce Jones, Trey Porter, Olalua Falimi. those aren't just seniors. Those are seniors playing, by and large, at a high level.
That's 8 kids you just mentioned.
In the case of Hyder, Bullitt, Smith, Bruce Jones, Trey Porter, I think you're talking about all guys who have the potential to get some all-conference recognition this year, be it first or second team or honorable mention. So those are seniors, 8 kids that you're going to lose next year. Next year looks like the reverse of this season. It's going to be an offense that has a lot of experienced guys back. It's going to be a defense that has a lot of youth. So Matt Wallerstedt's really going to have to, if he impressed you this year, he's really going to have to do some stuff, I think, to impress you next year because he's got his work cut out for him.
Huge recruiting year for Texas Tech,
Yeah.
especially on the defensive side of the
sure.
ball. Don Bryan has a question here for you, and this ought to get us in lots of trouble. AJ Don Williams would like to hear your thoughts on the officiating in the Big 12 Conference.
Well, Brian, to be honest with you, I'm not a person who gets very worked up about officiating, to tell you the truth.
Right.
Now, I think there were some questionable calls on Saturday. The Jakeem Grant pass interference, Jared Castor leg whip, it looked like they were maybe calling intent more so than what
Looks
he
like he
actually
whiffed.
did. Yeah. There, in any game, there's going to be plays that you disagree with. They're going to miss 2 or 3 here or there. But by and large, I think they get a large majority of the calls right. The way I look at it, there were 163 plays in that game on Saturday. You got 163 plays to go win a football game. Last couple of weeks before that, you had more than 170 plays. So I think the quality of the officiating in the Big 12, well, yeah, they're not perfect. They're human. They're going to make a few mistakes. I think the quality overall is still pretty good.
Another officiating question here from Robert Paldon. Did the officials have to explain their offensive pass interference call against Jakeem Grant in the first quarter? Incredibly terrible call, according to Robert.
Yeah. And again, I saw what the officials saw. I'm not sure what I would have. I don't think I would have called that. I mean, he did push off just a little bit with his arm, but I think there was a little bit of back and forth there. I would have let that go. Yeah, the officials do have to explain themselves. There is a protocol and procedure by which on Sunday and Monday, each coaching staff in the Big 12, you go back through your tape and you put together all the plays, all the calls or the non-calls that you question, and you send them into the conference office to Walt Anderson, the head of officials. And then within 24, 48 hours, they get back to the individual coaches in kind of a private, confidential way and say, yes, this one's wrong, this one missed that one here. These 3 that you disagreed with, they called them correctly. They got them right. They called what we would want them to call in that particular situation. So, yes, and it happens every week, not just last Saturday. It happens every week all across the league. The coaches send in the calls and non-calls that they have a problem with to get an interpretation, and then the league office sends them back whether the officials got it right or wrong.
I think the biggest thing people said after that was, how can little Jakeem Grant interfere with anyone?
Hey, he's pretty
He's
muscled
pretty
up,
thick, yeah,
though.
but I think that's the card Tech was playing is like, hey, what do you mean Jakeem Grant interfered with someone? How is this even possible? No, it is possible. He's an extraordinarily talented wide receiver, and he's going to do what he has to do to make a catch. Don, onward right now to Drew Conley. A good question here. Cliff seemed to have emptied the entire trick play playbook against Oklahoma. Do you think there are any more trick plays left? And we know the answer to this.
Oh yeah, I think there are trick plays left. I tell you, and I'm not predicting that Texas Tech will run a trick play or 2 or 3 this week, and I'm not predicting that Texas Tech will run a trick play or 3 or 4 next month. But what I saw Saturday gives me some insight into Cliff Kingsbury, and that is that he is creative and that he is willing to try stuff that really is pretty risky. I mean, when you look at it, particularly that punt return, I thought was
one of the craziest things I think I've seen covering college football.
Yeah, it was. I appreciated the creativity and the genius of it. At the same time, I thought that could have easily been a disaster, and you're also asking Tanner Jacobson in that situation to exercise a lot of judgment on.
Got to get a good bounce.
Yeah,
you got to
get a good bounce.
A lot of things could go wrong there.
A lot of things could go wrong there, and you also had to choose pick it up or let it go. Then the play in which Jakeem Grant scored the touchdown on the 17-yard pass. Cliff Kingsbury said they got that from watching a Colts game.
Yep,
the other night.
The previous weekend.
And earlier this week, Cliff said that the players, when they get together in summer workouts, a lot of times they will do some different things and what have you, and said, we'll come up with ideas, and said, if they believe in it, they'll usually make it work, even if I think it's the dumbest call in the world. But what we saw on Saturday, I think, is that Cliff Kingsbury is very open to suggestion, and he's very creative, and so I think you will see much more of this going forward.
And they said this week also when we talked to the kids, they got 6 or 7 plays that they run during the course of a week of practice. So yes, there are more trick plays up their sleeves. It just, if the opportunity presents itself and it looks like it's a high success ratio to run that play.
Yeah, I said much more going forward. Again, I'm not saying that you'll necessarily see another game with 5 trick plays like you saw against OU.
But they're there. They have them in the bag.
And I think the other thing is Cliff, by calling that game the way he called it, acknowledged, hey, this is a special situation. You're playing a tough team in a tough environment. You're a touchdown underdog. You need to think outside the box and do some things different. So I like that.
Don, last question here. A.J. Don Williams, this one comes from Ryan Cowan. Forgot to ask about Eric Ward. What can we expect from him for the remainder of the season?
He went through that slump there, for about 4 weeks where he was not getting the ball a lot. I think Eric will finish well. Part of that is the presence of Davis Webb, who I believe Davis looks like he sees the field better and distributes the ball to more receivers, I think, effectively than Baker Mayfield was doing, at least in those couple of games where he went out. And you've seen Eric Ward kind of bounce back. The last 4 weeks, 7+ catches 3 times, 100 yards twice, and 4 touchdowns. So I think he's running back into form. Obviously, with the success that Jason Morrow has had, you're going to continue to throw him the football. And Jakeem Grant and Bradley Marquez need their touches too. They can do stuff with it as well. So what it gives you, I think, is 4 pretty good options. And I think Eric Ward has the slump behind him, and he'll finish pretty strong.
He was huge in that game against Oklahoma. Maybe not as visible in terms of people rewatching the game, but from the field level, he made some big-time plays and some big-time blocks that Tech wouldn't have been that close if it wasn't for Eric Ward in that game.
He got knocked by quite a few people for the ball glancing off his hands and going for an interception, but that was about the only thing he did wrong on Saturday. 9 catches, more than 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. And as you said, some of his blocking is fantastic. Usually is, but we just saw more examples of it on Saturday.
Don, that's going to wrap up this episode of Don versus Twitter. Thank you all again for all the questions, and be sure to kick us your questions after the Red Raiders take on the Oklahoma State Cowboys in what should be a spooky environment, with the encouragement of Texas Tech athletic officials asking for a, quote, get weird and dress up in costumes, and basically to see how much of a nuisance you can make of yourself when attending.
There's actually going to be financial reward for best costumes on Saturday night at the stadium.
$1,000 for the best costume in that stadium. Can we dress up? I've got a horrible mind. You know what I could come as? A whole bevy of terrible things. Don, you want to try to get on that $1,000?
No, that's not for me.
I figured it wasn't
for me, but it will be interesting to see how many people show up in how many different kinds of garb.
In addition to the storylines dealing with the Halloween costumes, we'll of course keep you locked and loaded for all the storylines around the actual football game of Texas Tech versus Oklahoma State. Of course, coming up later this week, our UMC Health System, AJ Media pregame show, and our topics discussion with Krista Pirtle. That's going to wrap up this episode of Don versus Twitter. That is Don Williams. I am Zach Long, and this is RedRaiders.com.